The Indigenous Voice to Parliament, a permanent promise of Indigenous representation in government, a body in which First Nations communities can deliver information on issues that affect them directly, a path for tangible improvement in the lives of First Nations peoples, a stepping stone to a Makarrata, or a treaty for truth-telling and reconciliation, a proposal from the Uluru Statement of the Heart conceived by First Nations leaders that has the support of around 80% of the Aboriginal community. While there is overwhelming Aboriginal support to actuate the voice into reality, there is also great uncertainty and confusion about the voice in the non-Indigenous community. Australians will soon vote in a referendum to decide whether the voice should be enshrined into the Constitution, and you'll have to decide for yourself, yes or no. As migrants to this country, my team and I seek to act in solidarity with the traditional custodians of the land we now live on. As people of colour, we've benefited greatly from anti-colonial Aboriginal activism. We want to show you the historic atrocities committed against Indigenous Australians and their enduring oppression today. We want to show you how Indigenous people were treated and why it's important to hear their stories and listen to their truths in order to move forward and unite as a nation. We want to trace it back to the beginning. On this exact spot in Botany Bay more than 250 years ago in 1770, Captain Cook invaded Australia. Cook's arrival unleashed violence on First Nations peoples. And this was just the beginning. Cook claimed the country was uninhabited, despite recording smoke columns in his diary when he entered. Torres Strait elders echoed this message, stating that Cook did not discover us because we saw him. We were telling each other with smoke, yet in his diary he said, discovered. Cook was blatantly unwelcome, as Indigenous people on the shore thought they were ghosts. In fact, 2 Guigal warriors threw stones and spears at him and his crew, saying, "Wara wara wa," meaning you are all dead. He did not gain the consent of the Indigenous when he landed and took the land by force. Since the beginning of colonization, First Nations people were never given a choice. The British also governed over the land by force without a formal treaty with First Nations. Sovereignty was never ceded. In the immediate years following, the British expanded their settlements inwards and extreme guerrilla violence broke out. The frontier wars emerged, with open massacres, wars between the Indigenous and the British, as well as instances of resistance. The frontier wars are estimated to have killed around 90% of Aboriginal people at the time. The most intense conflict was the Black War in Tasmania, which lasted 7 years and saw the death of 1,000 First Nations peoples, as well as the exile of the remaining 200 survivors to Flinders Island. Today, most Australians know little of the frontier wars, erasing the violence of colonisation and the devastating loss of Aboriginal life and culture. This is yet another skeleton in the closet of Australian history. Between 1910 and 1970, the British enforced a policy of forced assimilation that was designed to eradicate Aboriginal culture and coerce Aboriginal people into adopting British culture. The most brutal assimilation campaign was the Stolen Generations, where Aboriginal children were forcibly removed from their families with the goal of preventing traditional knowledges and languages from being passed down. Rita Wenberg, a survivor of the Stolen Generations, testified in 2009 about being removed and put into Cootamundra Girls' Home when she was just 3 years old. She spoke about believing she was white after being indoctrinated on dressing, talking, and practicing religion as the British did. The 1997 Bring Them Home report found that at least 100,000 children were removed from their parents. This led to the devastating separation of families and grave loss of culture and connection to the land. It fractured and altered the lives of Aboriginal people once again and marked yet another period of governmental force against First Nations peoples without their consent. The 1970s marked a shift in the lives of Aboriginal people and the nation as a whole, sparked by the 1967 referendum, which changed the constitution to recognise First Nations people as full citizens who could be counted as part of the population and allow the Commonwealth to make laws for them. It opened the doors for Indigenous agency and positive change, bringing activism to the forefront. Redfern became the epicentre for Aboriginal resistance. It was where the mob came together to share stories of dispossession, trade ideas, and make plans to fight the system. The iconic Aboriginal tent embassy on the lawn in front of Parliament House, first established in 1972 as a declaration of unceded sovereignty, was started by 4 Aboriginal activists from Redfern, namely Michael Anderson, Billy Craigie, Bertie Williams, and Tony Curry. Since colonisation, there has always been a fight for Aboriginal self-determination and a political voice, and the activists of Redfern made significant progress in a fight that still continues today. As you've seen today, First Nations people have been oppressed since colonisation began, having control over their lives stripped away since Cook's arrival in 1770. Sovereignty was never ceded, instead it was taken and implemented by force. It was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Voice will give First Nations people a say on the matters that affect them. It is the first step towards establishing a treaty between First Nations peoples and the government. In order to come together as a nation to right historical wrongs and restore peace as the Makarrata ritual intends, the Voice must be established. The Voice is essential for our reconciliation as a nation. Let us move forward together. Let us unite as a nation. History is calling you. Vote yes.